Hello, my name is A'Jamal Byndon, the chair of Moore Board of Directors, and with me today is Dennis Womack, who's also a board member at Moore. And what we're going to do is we're going to have some issues of the day and have different topics we're going to talk about, but get people to look at how do you have a cordial or exchange of ideas and issues without losing your shirt. And so one of our goals at Moore is to bring more community conversations and people in leadership to talk about that. And I asked Dennis if he would come on and we can have that kind of a discussion. So instead of us playing the traditional role of the interviewer, we're going to be more like co-facilitating this conversation.
Absolutely.
Dennis is also part of, as I said earlier, Moore, which is moving off of Race Equity, which is a nonprofit organization that's been around for over 10 years. And in the last couple of years, we focus more on racial issue and anti-racism and race equity, which a lot of nonprofits don't do that. They tend to talk about this DEI stuff and generic stuff and sidestep to use the word racism in light of what we're experiencing and have experienced in this country. And so one of our concerns, Dennis and I have talked about this, how do we address issues either upstream or downstream, but at least address them and not sit on the sidelines on our hands. And we've agreed that we're going to talk about 4 or 5 different topics. One of the first one we're going to talk about is the murder in Buffalo, New York, of those 10 innocent people by a white supremacist and a racist and so on, and how the media and folks are treating him and so on. And even some people are sugarcoating that incident as a mental health issue when this stuff's been going on for years in the United States. One of the things we also want to do is be able to constructively talk about how do you complain or how do you criticize somebody or an issue on the merits or the politics of it versus getting personal. And I think that's a problem we face in both local governments and in national governments where people are just petty about some of the things they do and they really don't help the grassroots. So first, Dennis, I'd like to have us start off a little bit about talking about the Buffalo, New York. How did you see that and how did you react to that yourself as a person?
Well, I reacted to that pretty much the same as I reacted to the situation that we saw in South Carolina. Um, I know that from a Black American perspective is that we are a very open arm, welcoming group. And oftentimes we don't look for the bad in people. But I think that that's one of the things that we need to start being more observant of is people's movements and their actions as they enter into places within our community, because they may be doing exactly what that young man's intention was. And for the authorities or anyone to try and utilize that as a mental health issue only is setting up an escape mechanism for what I call the death penalty. Because as you know, nationwide, if someone is deemed to have psychiatric or mental health issues, they may just get life in prison. But I believe that from my perspective, someone needs to make an example out of this situation. And when I say make an example out of this situation, I do believe that we probably need to have a public spectacle here, so that other people who have those racial intentions to go and kill people think about it twice before they do it.
You know, and my reaction was I was surprised how, people act shocked that things like that happen. The guy was 18 years old, and I had one person who approached me who said we should go into those chat rooms because he's been bubbling up this conversation for years. And there are people in those white supremacy chat rooms where law enforcement don't have a chance to investigate or get inside there because they're private and encrypted. And my response was law enforcement, some of them were part of the problem too, because they got some white supremacies folks on their staff. They got people who in Nebraska years ago, and you and I are old enough to remember, where there was a member of the state patrol who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And the only way they got rid of him is they had to make sure that he couldn't carry a gun. So once they made a rule that he couldn't carry the gun, or it was already out there, that's how they got him out of law enforcement. But knowing this guy, he was pretty young, meaning he was not at retirement age. He probably showed up in another local police jurisdiction, like a lot of these bad cops and police officers and law enforcement folks who do when they mess up and deal with people. But going back to this Buffalo thing, what I found more egregious or crazy about is that he traveled 200 miles, went to a specific African-American place where people frequent in the community and just shot random people. And some of the comments and how people react in that, when people talk like this and they do this, at some point they're going to follow through. They become extremists. And we sit here with the same old him haul act like it's not reality. And it reminds me of crematoriums being fired up and genocide and so on. And we just got to be astute that there are people who just killing you because of your race or your ethnic or background or religion.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the problem is that I don't know why people will, one, be surprised at any of these instances because they're happening. They've even happened here in Omaha when you think about out at the Von Mauer incident. That could transpose itself into a situation where it becomes racial. And I think that one of the things that people need to become aware of is that there's a network going on out here that we may not be totally aware of. And it certainly doesn't exist within our community because our technology is at a different level of what other people are. But I do believe that some of those groups specify and identify particular areas in which they can get people to go and do those vicious activities. And they sit back and they revel in that because if you look at it, there's 11 people dead now, 10 of them Black, and some people are sitting back counting, well, that's less, 10 Black people less that we have to worry about.
Wow. I mean, that's hideous, that's sick, that's disruptive. And
but that's what we're dealing with
craziness.
Because if you go back and look at the history of this country, I mean, we were being hanged for someone just insinuating that we whistled at a white woman.
We're talking about Emmett Till in 1955.
Absolutely.
In the late summer.
And the picnic hangings where people would invite their kids. I mean, that stuff I do believe is passed down traditionally from different generations to generations. It's just a mindset. And I think that what is viewed as white privilege really has a lot to do with that.
Something as you said, and I'm going back to this lynchings and castrations and things that happened. There are over 5,000 African Americans that were documented by Ida B. Wells. If you read her book, and particularly her efforts for many years to stop lynching of African Americans. And then Malcolm talks about there was over 10,000 African Americans who were lynched because a lot of it was unreported. But the reason I raised that because sometimes when we talk about the history, we have to bring it to the forefront. But I'm reminded of on Facebook, there was a lesbian woman that I know. Lesbian is a contradiction. I mean, it's kind of oxymoron to say lesbian a woman because a lesbian is a woman who the question was raised is, how do you deal with birth control? She says, get rid of the penis. And I found that somewhat insulting and somewhat stupid to even say something that outrageous. Because again, we would not be here if it wasn't for the penis and the vagina, not to get too deep into the woods, but there's some things you just don't joke about.
Absolutely.
And so I raised it from a racial point of view, and I guess the person didn't come back and apologize, but then I had some so-called Black person who came out and said, oh, they were just kidding. No, you don't kid about stuff like that when people have been historically traumatized for 450 years by castrations and lynchings and things that happen, even legal executions of many African Americans who were innocent. And right now we have the Innocent Project that has been around for many years and have probably exonerated over 400 or 500 people who are on death rows ready to be killed because you have some corrupt law enforcement, judges, and racist police officers who are not dealing with it. So yeah, that is a sensitive topic for many of us. Many of these racists don't have a clue the depths of the anger and the trauma that we've experienced, as Malcolm would say, living in this American nightmare.
Well, just look at Tulsa. I mean,
1919.
Absolutely, and look at what's happening.
Or 1921, rather.
Yeah,
1919 was Omaha, Nebraska. There you go.
The same version of it, right. And it's just done in a different way. It's right. I want what you have because I never deemed you able to prosper in that way. And when you did, that anger and jealousy made me figure out ways to take from you, even if it meant killing you. And I think that same kind of mindset is what's driving some of these young men to do that same type of vicious
behavior. By the way, Tulsa had over 300 African Americans who were murdered, but when you look at some of the official version of the papers and that, they'll mention a few here. And then recently they came up with a location in the Greenwood district where they had mass graves. And so
Absolutely.
again, it's like how they treated Native Americans. And again, we got these clowns running for office talking about we can't talk about critical race theory or race issues or things that will make students feel bad. Well, can you imagine in Nazi Germany, again, they get a chance to have their history erased because some German people feel embarrassed by how they as a society treated certain groups and so on. And I think there's a good parallel in terms of that. But we got to keep talking about it because I think the trauma that people experience today is generational. And I look at some of our Negroes and bootlickers and people who come from the South, I can see in their faces this scaredness and this subservient mentality when they've been beat down for so many years. And many of them, like I had an uncle who I never met who joined the military when he was a young man just to get out of the South. And he ultimately got killed and murdered or killed in war as a soldier. And they didn't discover his remains until almost 60, 70, 80 years later. It's kind of weird how, from the war in 1939 to 1945, we're still bringing back bodies and people of that. But again, it's about our history. I want to switch up if I can. And again, one of the things we do is maybe switch up and have different topics. The election just recently happened here in Omaha, Nebraska, and Douglas County. What is your take on the elections of the winners, and what do you think is going to happen, particularly with the sheriff's office, which you got Wayne Hudson, you got Greg Gonzalez, you got Aaron Hansen, those guys running for that. And that's a position that people don't always know about, the importance of the sheriff. Then you got, of course, school board elections. But give me some of your viewpoints on what do you think is going to happen with both of those offices?
Well, I think what's going to happen, one, with the sheriff's office, got a funny feeling that Aaron Hansen is going to probably end up being in that seat. And the reason why I think that is because he is the epitome or the model of what I think Nebraskans want to see in terms of law enforcement here. Someone who appears to be strong and strong-willed and iron-fisted, so to speak. I supported Brother Hudson, and I prayed that he had that opportunity to take over that seat, because I think that from what I know of him, I appreciate his approach with people. I don't think that this particular community, which I call the forgotten community, the near north side or northeast Omaha, I don't think that we'll witness that caring, kind compassion in respect to that. Now, getting back to the school board, there was an article in the paper today where one of the head people of the learning community is now being taken to court for theft and embezzlement, stealing money.
$200,000.
Yeah, and
she's the head of that cross center up on 72nd off of Military.
Yeah, absolutely, right across from the Benson Golf Course up there. And I would think that should probably close down now because of the association. But they'll probably still receive money and be slapped on the back and told that they're doing a good job and that they can keep on doing what they're doing. But to me, that should be turned over to the community, because to me, that was all fake what they were doing up there. I don't know of a person that they provided any job training for. Do you?
Well, I went up there a couple of times for some meetings. They let us host a meeting there when we were trying to get some coalition people together. But I was trying to work with NCAP, and I was trying to work with Concord Mediation Center and some other nonprofits, and we never got off the ground. I mean, we met there. It was some nice people, but at the end of the day, it is hard to pull together a coalition to work on some progressive anti-racism, poverty issues, because we tend to be silos and we taught not to work collectively and trade information. Again, that's part of the problem of being in Omaha, Nebraska, is that people tend to play off each other and have that crowd bag mentality. I'm gonna go back to the school board elections a little bit. I see that there are two candidates. One is a former incumbent, or he was a president of the board at one point. I don't know anything that he's done for the African American community. Then you got another woman who's running. I don't know her. Never seen any substance when they talk. They're talking gibberish. They talk like they're puppets for the OPS system. And then I even talked to Melvin Muhammad at one point, and he said he had an interview with the superintendent. She turned the tables like, what are you going to do for the district? Like she was in charge. And what they got to remember is they should fire her on the spot because they got a school district that's in meltdown. You got people who really don't know what they're doing. It's obvious when you got that many teachers leaving, you can't blame it all on the pandemic. But I'm not going to talk about the teachers. I'm talking about the community and the parents. We have African Americans in key leadership positions who are imported from out of town, who have never met in North Omaha with a group of parents without their handlers or their entourage, or people like me and you who are going to call it like it is. So they go with their rehearsed PowerPoints with their same song and dance. And if you listen to the board meeting, they're insulting. I mean, Larry criticized them because it's a closed shop. They go in executive session all the time. They have consent decree, and half the stuff they talk about is public information. So
Absolutely.
I'm really saying, give us back our tax dollars, because it's obviously not educating our kids with the high truancy level and the racism that's a practice within OPS.
I thought that the school board was the superintendent's boss.
Right, they're supposed to be, except in Omaha, they act the other way around.
I know, and I've witnessed that as well. Two, some of the issues that you and I have talked about, the behavioral issues that are now starting to become to the forefront, which is another reason why many of the teachers are leaving. And I've noticed that many of the teachers that I've heard being interviewed on TV, or maybe even have talked to, most of them mention this issue of safety.
Right.
And I don't think that collectively the Omaha Public School Board can compile a parental responsibility format to where safety becomes secondary in the public school system. And it's a very, very simple process. I do believe that they could put that together if they were willing to listen to some of us who've been out here in the social arena, who have either worked or contracted with the state of Nebraska. Many of us have worked in the mental health arena. So, what I think we could offer them is a wealth of knowledge. But the one thing that I've noticed, they're very unwilling to listen.
Well, they got a lawyer who's telling them what to do, a lame duck lawyer who think that they're in charge of the school board, and they got them like puppets or automatrons or robots, or use like the Borg if you look at Star Trek, but they're literally not engaging the community. And I even argue the point is, when it was the last time you saw a school board member in the district with a group of parents talking about issues of the day? And again, to go back to how you and I grew up in our environment, if we put on a show as a student, our parents would be up in that school dealing with us accordingly. You got kids raising kids. You got people who really don't know how to deal with African-American men. They keep firing all of them who work there, getting rid of them. But my problem is we just got to bring our community back into the schools.
Well, and I think that's probably one of the things that more can do, because I do believe from not only a local standpoint, I believe from a national standpoint that education, our workforce, our basic whole infrastructure, we need reform programs here in this country, because right now, if you were to look at things that's going on, we're spiraling downward.
Right.
And and it's very obvious that we're spiraling downward. And I think that spiraling downward has a lot to do with some of the angst, the anger, and a lot of the issues that we're being confronted with on a daily basis, whether it's public shootings, massacres, basically is what they are. Our kids are basically interfering with the progress of our educational system, and workforce programs are at an all-time low. We got employers running around here begging for people to work, but nobody wants to work.
Well, I know part of it, Dennis, goes back to this pandemic. When you give somebody an extra $300 a week or $600 a week on your unemployment, and it's more than what you make in your basic minimum wage job, why would you want to go back to work, particularly if they're going to give it to you for a whole year? Now, again, I do think that some of the people deserve the incomes they need when they're low income. I don't think people should be poor in the United States.
Absolutely.
There should be a guaranteed baseline for everybody, from shelter, food, healthcare, and so on. And you don't hear a lot of these social justice people or so-called progressive arguing the baseline for our whole society, like they have in some of those social democrats in Sweden and so on in those areas. But we just got to have some more conversations versus to have these same mealy mouse personalities or bobbleheads out there on the front saying. The other thing I'm going to say, and I think is important, is that you got student body that's 73% student of color, but yet the teachers, administrators of color are less than 12%. And then when you break it down to the male category, particularly for African-American males, there are many African-American males who they just do not like to be around because they hate Black men. And again, when you see people, and I'd say this from working in social service years, I'll walk in a room and someone starts to demonize me because of my gender, and they get to promote their gender or their orientation, something's wrong with that picture. And I will argue emphatically that if you're not at the table, then you're going to, as they say, you're going to be on the table, and also you'll be under the table, because how do you have these respective all-white committees and groups where they're not bringing the very subjects of poverty or criminal justice or juvenile justice? They're all white. And again, most of them are Trumpites. And they probably are endorsers of the same kind of plantation cottage industry we have in the cottage industry of child welfare. So it's a big issue we got to deal with. But OPS is a hot mess.
Well, absolutely it is. And I think it's a classic case of what Brother Malcolm X said a long time ago. The chickens have come home to roost. And I also think that because the chickens have come home to roost, that the new superintendent, unfortunately, had been sold a bad bag of goods when she accepted that job. Because I think the reality sandwich that she has to eat right now is too big for her to hold and too big for her to swallow right now. Right. Because when you got 700 teachers who have decided that they want to leave the system. Now, I went back and found some research from a person who I know was involved in Omaha Public School at the TAC building. And I was informed that on a average yearly, 500 teachers leave. Well, there's 200 more to that 500. So you looking at another 40% that's leaving, okay? In addition to what you've had before, which would have been the so-called 100%. And then when you say you have a meeting, and I hate that they publicize this, you have a meeting with those 700 teachers, and you got 3 of them to stay. That's not a very good percentage. I mean, from a statistical standpoint, my brother, that's not very good.
Well, you know, it's some type of adult brain comments made by these leaderships and these positions, and I use the word adult brain or asinine or whatever. It's like, how do you say certain things and you don't know that it rubs people wrong when you're in the middle of the Titanic and the ship is going down? And as somebody reported, we need to break the school district up into different areas.
I think the problem was that I think the World Herald wanted to make her look bad.
Oh, well, I would even argue, so the issue I would say is if you've never run a district like Omaha with this apartheid segregation that has a kind of negativity on race issues, it's hard to come in here and walk in the landmines and walk between the raindrops. And I don't care, you know, I looked at her qualification. Obviously, she was never a superintendent in the high level. And so she's coming to one of the most difficult, racially divided, segregated communities in the United States, Omaha, Nebraska. It's been that way since we were born. And then you're going to have to run with some politics of these unionites who won't support some of the parents being involved in that. And they're banning parents if you become so assertive, just trying to say, question the quality of education. So if you don't have, you got board members, I sit there and I watch it, I'm like, you got to be kidding. Why did you run for office and you get in there and you say Easter piece, like, I went out and visited such and such a place and it was nice and I didn't want to disturb the students. I'm like, we're talking about policy issues. We're talking about you making site visits to a school. What about site visits to your community of the constituents who elected you? But then it's the other thing is the school district is I don't think it's going to get better until it gets worse.
I think you're right.
When you got people like you and I who've never or rarely been invited inside the classrooms or the schools or even to give them our version of our history and our culture, then you got brainwashing taking place.
Well, I think the problem that the superintendent had is that when she accepted the job, the so-called status quo group around here surrounded her with the wrong people, and they led her down the wrong path. They gave her the Judas goat that we know of that used to be over in the stockyards in South Omaha. And Unfortunately, it was somebody who really doesn't have a real knowledge of Omaha because they're not from
Right.
Omaha.
Many of them don't have a clue about
They
Omaha.
have no clue
Never,
about it.
and if you ask them to drive across the city, they couldn't do it without a GPS on their phones in their car because they have no
Absolutely.
clue about our community. And,
Absolutely.
and you got
Absolutely.
people leadership like that. And like I had one person, I'm going to mention their name, was been in North Omaha for many years, didn't know where the Washington Branch Library was. How does that work out if you got kids and you, again, we don't have to go to every place, but at least know where Metro Community College is, or know where some landmines or landmarks, rather. They landmines for them because they don't go there.
Well, that's one of the things that I've always talked about is that the status quo brings individuals here from out of town and they put them on TV and say, oh yeah, this you guys' new leader. I saw something like that today when they were talking about the issues of infant mortality in the Black community. And you could see them setting up where this funding was going to go all along. It was some group called I'll Be a Black Girl or something like that. And I heard this young lady talking about it. And I said to myself, I don't think that young lady is a parent who's talking about it. Some young lady, her name was Ashley something.
Oh, sorry, I know. She was on the board of the ACLU with me, who backdoored me behind some of the crap that went on there. ACLU got a lot of racism, and one time in the meeting, I made a comment. I'll tell this public to anyone. I said some kind of way they made Ashley in a key position on the exec committee, and I guess they put her up to kind of go up against me. And I says we're not in the same world. And then her and Marge Plum and then Daniel Comrade also, we're going to tolerate that. And they went and got a lawyer and got a letter, or at least they were going to stick a lawyer on me. I ended up going back to the meeting because I couldn't believe that Ashley played into that game because, again, she left Heartland Family Services. She left the other organization, Kiewit Foundation, they had her there. And when each time she left, there was no comments on how they got rid of the so-called diversity position at Heartland Families. They replaced her with some, I don't know if she was a Hispanic or white woman, but you don't hear a word from Heartland Family on race issues. So when you look at these Negroes and handkerchief heads and bootlickers and Uncle Toms, and I say that very seriously, who have no track record in our community, they've never, some of them have raised or dealt with kids on the level that you and I've dealt with. They have no reason to be sitting at the table lapping up to these racists who hate Black men and Black families. And again, I've never seen them teach a course on race diversity. I've never seen them talk about the Black family or teach a course or do anything for our community. And so I call them out because at the end of the day, look at their resume, look at their productions, and look at what we've done over the years to get this far. And we sit here and with mealy mouth and don't say how these apologists treat our community, and particularly those who have dark skins.
Well, you know, my brother, I would say I would go even deeper than that. None of them have ever even written a referral for a food pantry for anyone in this community.
Right.
Let me just tell you what I see that's going on. And I'm sure that you know this from a political standpoint. Right now, if you look at 16th Street, right on Florence Boulevard, 20th and Nicholas, there's a building down there adjacent to where the old Micklin lumber used to be, which is now a big apartment complex down there. Okay. CHI is getting ready to break ground down there and put that clinic there so that they can do one or two things, work on what they call this infant child mortality program in the Black community. I would say that's an affront to Charles Drew, because Charles Drew has been the mainstay within this community. Two, I think they're positioning that young lady or former city councilman to be down there because one of our current city councilmen, Pete Festerson, I do believe is the vice president at CHI.
Wow, so we got a conflict of interest that's coming up with people getting money down the tube. Oh, I tell you what I forgot to mention with Ashley. Levon Stennis raised an important issue where ACLU has never dealt with African-American community. If you look at their log records, their travel records, they've never really been in North Omaha in their career doing any substantive work. So Levon Stennis raised an issue in the letter to Facebook and other people. It was an email comment or whatever. But she says, why is the ACLU using a Black face in a position when they want to hire Black lawyers? They've never had a Black lawyer in their history, nor have they really had many Black people or African Americans on their board of directors. I don't think they've ever had a staff member of color until recently, and so on. But anyway, LeVar raised a good point. And they basically, when I raised the issue in the board meeting, they downplayed it. They basically said, so what? Who is Lavon? I'm like, hold it. She's raising a good point there. We may have our disagreements, but at the end of the day, if ACLU, if you look at their track record, you look at the cases they've brought before, they're always dealing with white folks, or they're kind of apologists, or those safe issues. And I've actually been in their office once. It took me a while to find it because it's hid up in a corner somewhere in the side building. But they got it like Fort Knox. You got to get buzzed in there. And it's like, what are they afraid of? And then I heard one day in a board meeting, not confidential, where Danielle was sharing that her former is a father police officer, and that people were calling and threatening. And she said her father told her that unless they physically say they're going to kill you, they get to say all kinds of stuff. So when I make a comment in a board meeting that we're not in the same world and they treat that as an insult, what kind of white fragility and Negro fragility am I dealing with? Again, I'm not going to keep quiet with all these kind of behaviors that are going on in our state. So when you and I talk about issues, they exist that way because we got people in high places who look in the other way are friends of the system.
Absolutely. And that's a problem here, is that people are being paid here to be silent. And that's the problem. You look at some of your top positions, which you really don't have major top positions anymore, where Black people had them. We used to have people at old companies like Northern Natural Gas or Enron, the phone company.
You name it. We had, anything in our community was predominantly aimed at our community. Even our KWSP used to be run by people with,
people of color.
And who can advocate, who know how to speak to politicians. You don't have that today.
I think what we've done is we've given over our power and control. I don't know where that happened, because I know that people like you and I, we wouldn't give up that power and control within the community if we were in those positions. But I do know that there's been an onslaught on jobs that pay over $60,000 a year. And if you think about it, there's people in the community, the majority community, that believe that they should only have those jobs.
Right. Well, you look at St. Francis, you look at Promise Ship, you look at a lot of these organizations, Heartland Family Services, you will rarely see an African-American in a key position in these racist organizations. And if you look at the board of directors, Habitat just got through getting, what, $11 million? Look at that infrastructure. Look who they got on their board.
Let's talk about that, because Habitat had a groundbreaking up at the old Myatt Park properties over there off of 50th and Sorensen Parkway.
I know where that is.
And that is in City Council woman Juanita Johnson's district.
Is that far? I thought it was somebody else. That's in her district?
That's in Juanita's district.
I didn't know that far over. I thought she was more closer to 24th and like Ames over. Okay.
Oh, she wasn't invited to the groundbreaking.
Well, wait. Why would you not invite the only Black city council persons to something that the city's going to control? What kind of nepotism, foolishness, stupidity is that?
Well, I know there's been a question about it as to why she wasn't invited. And from what I understand, the executive director at Habitat said that she was not aware that Juanita Johnson wasn't invited.
Wow. Well, wait, hold on.
But you as an executive director,
you should know that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it reminds me of the time when Ben Gray was out of town when they invaded or they raided those apartments off of Lake Street about 37.
Yeah.
And he was out of town, and they pulled all this massive intervention to clean it up and to help many of those refugee families and to deal with it. What was the name of that complex?
I still call it Tommy Rose Garden.
I remember that, but they've changed about 4 different times. It's still a Rose by the other days, but it was a dysfunctional landlord. But Ben Gray came back and said, I'm going to do something about that. And they didn't. Well, hold on. How do you got all these nonprofits up there and the police department and everybody else doing this, and you the city council for that area, and you have no clue? I mean,
well, he didn't have a clue.
And what did you do about it?
That guy was proud to receive a paper certificate of completion for going through a youth program in Minnesota. He bragged about it so greatly, and I was like, dang, that must have been the first time that guy ever received a certificate of completion. And all it was a Xerox copy of paper.
Man, you cold-blooded, man. I thought I could be cold-blooded when I talk, because again, when you tell the truth, you get to tell the truth. As Ernie likes to say, take me to court, sue me.
Absolutely, take me to court.
Because the record will show when I said that sometimes we don't have the power, being the only African American in the room of a bunch of, I'll use the word, daughters of the Confederacy who support the Trumpite mentality. And then when you want to vote, you one vote, and they've already practiced how they're going to vote, what they're going to say. And we're smart enough to know when somebody's trying to game us. I mean,
Oh,
again, we're
absolutely.
old school, man. And
Absolutely.
you
Well,
know,
I think that
we know how to listen to music the right way, where we get some words and meanings that mean something to make us do stuff to change the conditions for our people.
well, you and I were blessed with mother with too, because we had two smart mothers. Okay, so and fathers who cared about us. So I understand.
Well,
But
and Dennis, that's another thing that I'm really bothered by. Many of these young men don't understand the role, importance, and people in our community, how fathers play. And I've heard that scenario where they said when the male elephant is not present, things happen in that situation. Again, you have the balance of nature. You have men, women, you have children, and there's a family. And it's funny how they hijack our family, want to work with only our kids and do all these special programs, but they don't want to go through the parents. And again, those kids come from parents that go back home every night, and you can't try to fill their head with that racist propaganda or that inferiority complex that they get when they hang out with some of these people who despise them, but they're only doing it because they're making money off their backs. They come on millions of dollars to spend on our problems, but as McKinney and Wayne said in their conversation about all this money coming down, is that they have not made improvements. They don't have benchmarks. They don't even keep data on racially who they serve. So why are they even in your neighborhood if they can't even tell you who walks in the door? And I would think many of them are locked behind their plexiglass doors with keys, or they're scared to even be near us.
well, I think they're scared to actually come into the community. I think it's protected. If you think about it, the police are operating three in this individual to every one in every other community.
Right.
So we're over policed. And
then you get over criminalization of behaviors that are victimless crimes. And, you got Black people laying up in prison for years over some marijuana or some situations that white people are out here selling drugs illegally and getting away with it. And then, people go to Colorado, get their little marijuana, their fix. They think they go across the border in Nebraska and they're going to get treated a certain way. No, once you come across that state line, the police officers have forfeiture laws where they even get to keep some of the money. I mean, the whole thing is corrupt. So they're going to be out there, and instead of looking for the regular speeders, they're looking for somebody who they think could be suspected carrying some marijuana or some, whatever. And it's just unfortunate we spend all these law enforcement dollars when we should be dealing with resolution, police resolution, conflict resolution, restorative justice, all the stuff that they do in other countries to bring the people away from being locked up in the warehouse in these dungeons we call prisons.
Well, speaking of money that's coming down, I really like the fact that Senator Wayne and McKinney actually even spoke up to try to get some money for North and South Omaha. I had to commend them on even bringing that up, because that's a tough thing here in Nebraska, because working for the U.S. Commerce Department and the United States Department of Labor, I always found that some of my Republican counterparts always told me, Womack, although that money's designated to go to the impoverished community there, we're going to divert it and take it somewhere else. And I think
you said Republicans actually said that to you?
Oh yeah, they actually told me that, and smiled about it at the same time. And I said to myself, man, that's been going on for a long time around here. And
urban renewal, TIF money, all that stuff.
Absolutely. All that's been, and what we need to do, some of us that understand economy and economics, I think we need to come up with a watchdog group around this community, and more can probably
you really need oversight. We're not getting you from our
oversight committee to where if that money's coming to this community, then we need to see exactly who's getting it and what are the outcomes of what they're doing for that money.
In terms of outputs and matrix of making sure that people can get benefits from and things like that, right?
Well, the community has to benefit from it, or else it's a waste of money. And that's one of the things that we don't want to hear anymore, because when I moved back to Omaha, I started participating with the Nebraska Democratic Party. And one of the things I always heard from some of the Democratic leadership at that time is, Womack, we tried to get money into North Omaha, but some of the leadership there in North Omaha misused the money.
Well, and you know, I'm not gonna talk about the dead, as they say in the African proverb, that when the lion dies, we talk about the beauty of his skin, you know, because
Mhm,
people are afraid of lions for the most part. But again, you say something good about the dead.
mhm.
But there is something wrong when we look at reverse engineering, which is a concept that I'm using more lately, that it did get this way overnight. And going back to the money, if you don't have the right people at the table, and right now they're not bringing them to the table, it's not going to happen the way they think it's going to happen. Look at the Mutual of Omaha giveaway, the TIF thing, the issue with the trolley car. I mean, there are so many of these big corporate interests that are making lots of money off of things that traditionally go to reform and help underserved communities. And now these blatant politicians and racists, and that's the best way I can use is racist, they really don't care. And they got to the point they have so much cohesive power, and we fighting among ourselves, that the money that traditionally have gone to improve the quality of life for people like senior citizens, even Social Security has done a great job in some areas helping older people, but we're not going to get that in Omaha when you got people who are down in those back rooms with all their same clan people. I use clan with a C here, CLAN, as a group as opposed to K. And they're just doing what they're doing. So Omaha is not going to be improved as long as you don't have the very people who you want to benefit from it at the table.
Well, there are people that are keeping people like you and I, away from the table. You know, they're hired and paid to do that because with our knowledge combined, and I'm talking from back to the 60s here
Oh, I'm
in
gonna go
terms
with the 70s. You got a little bit few ages over
yeah,
here, so I'm gonna
and
let you take
working
the 60s.
in
I'm gonna go to the 70s.
programs.
I graduated from high school in 73. Okay.
Yeah, programs like comprehensive employment training agency, job training. You know, your business, uh, your business community, your commerce community. You know, we offer a lot of wisdom and experience in that, but in Nebraska, it's not to be known that Black men have those capabilities.
Well, when you have them there, so they're not going to put you at their table when they want their cronies at the table. Look at the land bank, okay?
Mhm.
How many African Americans are participating in that? That's basically a front organization. The
Yeah.
director, Shannon Snow, will not get back with me. I've written letters, I've called her. She obviously had a car accident excuse one time. But if you look at the way they run that organization, they're basically like a holding ground for the elite to come in and control the plantation. You look at NCAP, you know, you got a white director who lives in Lincoln, who commutes every now and then, but that's a poverty program. That was a mainstay of Goka back in the day, where we learned how to be
Charles
on board of
Lane, yeah,
directors. You know,
absolutely.
Charles Lane. You go back to all those different people who ran that organization. They always had people in the community front and center and know how to address and talk about poverty. Then you look
Absolutely.
at some of these other organizations that you think would be front and center, like I'm going to use Concord Mediation Center. How many people of color do they serve and engage with to get them out of the court system or to get them to mediate conflicts? We got some of the greatest conflicts in our community. Concord should be like 4 times as big as it is. But again, you're not going to get that when you got an executive director who doesn't live in town, who commutes an hour and a half or whatever he commutes from Iowa. I'm not
Right.
mad at the guy. I'm just saying there could be better ways of having people of color on your board of directors can help you direct better traffic. And the previous director, I raised to her the lack of race on her board, racial person of color, and she gave me all kind of him-haul excuses. So if you got the very nonprofits who's supposed to helping you, pimping you, then you're not going to see the kind of growth that we're supposed to have in our community. Is going to continue to be a slum or less than or whatever else it is. And as Elijah said one time, we got spirits on every corner. He's talking about the church and the bars. And those
Yeah.
be the ones that proliferate in our community instead of a thriving where people can go forward.
Well, how do we help the community to take the yoke off of their back and stop from being pimped? How do
Well,
we
you know
do that?
what, Dennis, you raised a valuable and important question that other people have to answer for themselves. But I would argue 3 points. You got to educate people, you got to control the media, and you also got to control your dollars. So if you look at all 3 of those things, if we control it like Greenwood and Tulsa, Oklahoma, or when you can educate your own group and not have imported brainwashers, and I use the word brainwashers in a very serious manner because at the end of the day, if you get 12 years of high school and 4 years of college and you have no allegiance to the people who look like you, then you've been brainwashed. Look what they do to Native Americans. Look what happened in concentration camps and Holocaust in Europe. I mean, there were some
Absolutely.
things that went down that we don't want to talk about because we find it sad to talk about it. But you can't continue tricking all the people all the time with the foolishness and these shell games that they do in our community, and particularly these poverty pimps who really don't have any track record. And all I'm going to ask a question like you just asked, what are the three most significant things that your agency have done to reverse the poverty or the racism in our society? And can you name it collectively as an organization? Can you name it collectively what you've done as an individual?
Well, I think that we've allowed ourselves to be engineered into this concept to where we allow people to come into our community and sprinkle their foo-foo dust on us. And we walk away happy and delighted. And I think that's been a major issue here, because how can somebody tell me that this is your new leader and we want you to follow them? And that's the same concept of the old Judas goat over there at the packing house. It's like, we want you to follow this person because he's getting ready to lead you to slaughter and continue this pattern of poverty that you currently live in. You ask the average Black person around here, where was Nebraska in poverty in 2014? And most of them will probably tell you, oh, we was living good here. But we don't know that Nebraska was number 2 in poverty per capita in 2014. And I can assure you, things haven't got that much better here. Okay. Because it's the result of it is what I see on a daily basis, whether it's in the social services arena. Perfect example of this issue of child mortality with more. And I didn't like the way the Channel 7 put this. Yeah, there's more Black babies dying than white and Hispanic. I mean, it was almost like, dang, we're doing a real good job on them Negroes, okay? I mean, come on. It's almost like they're patting themselves on the back.
Well, it's been that way historically. I mean, that's what you have, the infant mortality records and stuff out there. Every woman matters.
And then your county commissioner comes on talking about STDs and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, man, we've been knowing about chlamydia and all that stuff around here for years. Y'all bring that stuff up every 5 to 7 years. And then y'all want more money. And we can see where you're moving towards that. And it's almost like the same old tape being replayed over and over and over again around.
And Dennis, I know we're getting close to the end, but I want to raise a couple of points before we close out. Number one, you and I are saying some things that a lot of people in the community are saying, but they don't have the microphone, nor do they have the media to communicate, because the media, World Herald obviously was involved in printing some stuff over the years, covering up stuff, even the whole issue before the World Herald became that, the lynching of Will Brown. I mean, they fanned the fires of all that stuff to create that ruckus. And even today they do that. And I can't remember the last time they had an African-American male working as a reporter in the World Herald. The last one I knew of,
Rudy Smith,
a guy from Jamaica, where Ruby was a photographer.
Yeah.
But he was not a journalist in the sense of writing articles. He was a good photographer and an excellent photographer. And I love some of his pictures he had. But my point is that if the community doesn't control its own communication means, and that's something that Elijah continually speaks to, then we're going to be holding to their oppressors. And so when Tucker and them get away with saying all the stuff they say on Fox News, when you and I come out and share some stuff, they're ready to take us to court for telling the truth.
Yeah.
And you and I have said nothing that we can't prove by looking at the conditions of our community.
Absolutely. And I would tell them that us telling the truth is going to set them free too. Okay. So that's one of the things that people need to really understand, is that every community has a spokesperson. And unfortunately, some of us that are speaking the truth around here appear to get demonized and criticized. But as long as they're talking about us, then we know that we're affecting them.
Well, and by the way, Dennis, today, as we're doing this taping, it's Malcolm X's birthday.
Absolutely.
May the 19th.
Absolutely.
And I had a chance to watch on Zoom or on Facebook Live the presentation at the Malcolm X Foundation. They had a pretty good turnout. And they had a couple of old guards and old speakers, Bobby Seale, and then another person who actually was a friend of Malcolm and knew some details. He was an excellent speaker. Bobby spent a little bit of time talking about himself. But my point I would raise back to Leo or anybody, Joanne or all of them, is as we do these events, how do we translate into our kids having a Malcolm X class at UNO or Creighton or other places? Because Malcolm was like a god to many of us, and how he sacrificed himself to be, he's basically a martyr in many of our eyes, because
he's Black history and he's Nebraska.
And we don't give him the homage and I'm on Nebraska being here, but yet when you have some stuff with all these other handkerchief heads, they come out in full force and they do all this kind of tap dancing on top of a table, get off and that. But Malcolm is a very important person internationally as well as nationally for African Americans, and we don't have the infrastructure in our universities. Black Studies don't offer a mandatory course on it, which I'm disappointed in the Black Studies whole department and their curriculum, because they're not developing advocates and social justice people and how they were created. Then you got Creighton that don't have any Black professors. Hardly. There might be, you can count them maybe on one hand in the whole institution, because it's a white supremacist institution. The law school is a joke. I mean, you got very few African Americans in law school teaching in Lincoln or no more. So when you wonder why we become dumber and dumber as a community or as a group, because you got to look at how these institutions maintain the plantation.
Well, and I think one of the reasons that they don't want to, educate people regarding Malcolm is that Malcolm spoke the truth. And that's part of why they're fighting this so-called issue of critical race theory around here.
Which we didn't talk much about.
Absolutely. Because he told the truth. And I don't think that, for some reason or another, people don't want to hear that, the truth. If my thing is if you don't want to hear the truth, then why do you hide it and still conduct some of the same practices that racists have traditionally from a historical standpoint? And getting back to some of them politicians, they're speaking in code, okay?
Dog whistles
what they're doing. But they would get mad at a person like you and I for being able to identify and recognize what they're talking about, because you're not supposed to be that smart. You were only supposed to be educated to the 6th grade, the 6th level, so that I can maintain superiority over you. I don't want you to learn how to read because I can't allow you to become smarter than me. And I think that the real racists in this country, they're able to identify your knowledge, my knowledge, and they can make a determination that our knowledge may be superior to theirs. So therefore, they don't like us, and they definitely don't want us at the table.
Yeah, and Dennis, here's a point that I make, and I don't say this to be facetious. I really never talk about my formal education. I have a bachelor's degree in political science, minor in history of psychology, a master's in urban ed, which deals with education issues and secondary ed issues, and then an ed specialist degree and a certificate in gerontology. And I've had white folks, racists, come up and say, do you have a college degree? I don't put my degrees behind my name, nor is Malcolm. He never graduated from high school. And you see how Malcolm was probably one of the most brilliant persons and come out of the 19th century. Mm-hmm. And so one of the points I said is, there are people who have PhDs and I've never seen them write anything, say anything. And there's some Negroes in our community, in spite of their formal education, I've never seen their name on a piece of paper on anything. So how do you exist? And they don't speak to the issues either. So either you got to deliver or not deliver. But at the end of the day, that honorary degree that they give you, or as Steve Biko said in South Africa one day when he was talking to South African graduates, he said the reason they give you those black robes is they don't want you to show those dirty spots that they got you doing their dirty work for them. It's kind of a joke he made, and everybody got the picture that you shouldn't be sellouts and turnouts and turncoats and Aunt Your Mamas and Uncle Toms. But we got too many of these coloreds people, and I use that by looking at institutions that many of them don't have the connections to us, indigenous people. They don't like dark-skinned people. They don't respect Sudanese people because they're too black. And you got these people who are passing. Here we have the case of us dealing with passing years ago. You got the same thing. Look at some of these leaders in our positions and so on who are passing, and they're not doing anything for us. And we don't call them up because we're just happy to have a dark skin in a high place. No, get rid of them. Again, if the car can't drive, you can't drive it. And if it's stuck up on some stilts and everything, you can't do nothing with it. If it doesn't have an engine, you can't do nothing with it. So again, a gun without bullets is useless. And that's what we're having in our educational system. We got more people being churned from the school to prison pipeline. And there are very few opportunities that we get to say things to ourselves and to our group members, except through Facebook. And even then they censor you. And as Reverend Sanders said, they put him in Facebook jail. How do you get put in Facebook jail when you're reverend? He's not using the profanities that I hear all these Christians use in these meetings. And the ACLU use another example. They use so much cussing in that meeting that I had to tell them to stop cussing around me, because I'm like Malcolm. When Malcolm came to Omaha, he had to tell the ministers to stop cussing in front of him, because he said there's a Muslim minister in the room. And Ernie shared that story. But so when you got these cussaholics, and you again, if a young kid cusses, we kick him out of school. If the kid look at you cross-eyed or something, you get rid of them or whatever. So my point I'm going to argue, in fact, is that at the end of the day, let's dump it all, get rid of it, start over. Because right now, these learning communities are not working. They're just pimping us. You got the Buffett Institute, Early Childhood, get $3 million to teach about racism. The people that got running the show have no history in our communities. How can you teach about racism if you suffer from white fragility or Negro amnesia or all the other stuff that they suffer from? Because they don't care about us. If they cared about us, they would do something.
Well, in Nebraska, for some reason or another, I don't understand why they push this issue of having to have a degree to get certain jobs here, because 85% of the jobs in this country you don't need a degree for.
Well, the reason I argue that also is that I got plumbers and people around me, carpenters, who make more money than me than all my
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to say degrees in and of itself give you knowledge. And actually, in fact, for some time, when I didn't say this earlier, but when I first started my ed administration degree, I went to the UNO classroom, and it was one of those little huts outside, or those little cubicles. And I came in the day, it was kind of rainy, and I looked behind me, and I always never forgot this. There was like 7 or 8 or 9 trench coats that were London fog type, that kind of a beige looking khaki color. Then FBI. I looked around the room, right? It was, and these were the male administrators or whatever from OPS and elsewhere. Then I noticed they all had on a certain kind of a dark pants on, and they had a polo shirt. Yeah, and it was almost like they were dressed like in China, where they make them wear the same uniform. Like these are so-called educators with master's degrees and advanced degrees, and they dressing like puppets. I mean, there was no color in the room except when I brought in that racist room. But I ain't gonna lie to you. I find it amazing how we allow ourselves to be cloned and be brainwashed and not have independent thoughts. And again, one thing I keep saying to you and me, Dennis, goes back to, it's not freedom of speech, it's freedom of thought. Absolutely. So if I get to say what I want to say, and you get to say what you want to say, and we're not necessarily breaking the rules and cussing anybody out, as the old lady said, you can keep talking.
Absolutely. And I'm going to do that, because one thing I know, I'm not going to let them zip lock my mouth. Okay.
I'm going to hijack that phrase, because I think a lot of zip-lock Negroes and sellouts and Uncle Toms and racists and Tucker type Fox News people running in these institutions. So anyway, we're getting close to the end, and I just want to say, Dennis, before we close out, is there anything you want to say to our viewing audience? Because again, this will be posted on both our Facebook and our webpage, and I know we're going to catch a little drama from some people who have thin skin, who can't deal with constructive freedom of speech.
Well, and that's fine that they would become offended, because sometimes and I know you've heard this statement too, the truth hurts.
Right.
And
I agree with you. And again, I dislike when people use euphemism and DEI, diversion, inclusion, and equity, and they really ain't got a Black person in the room, or African American, or Sudanese, or somebody who has some African roots in there. And again, you got these other people. I've been in a room with some of these other folks, these other groups, and they quiet as the church mouse. I thought they were just sitting
I don't like the term of what they call real inclusion around here, because it doesn't really exist.
Well, the numbers show that. And again,
the numbers show it.
All you gotta do is do a check box of all these boards of directors and leadership, and they keep recycling the same old sellout Uncle Toms. And some of these people got some serious criminal offenses on their records that they shouldn't be at the table trying to be ethical and talk about anything, when they still get that criminality mind of exploiting our community over stuff they did. Now, again, I can accept if you, Malcolm, as Malcolm says, we've all been to jail on some issue about social justice. But when you go to jail for embezzlement or misappropriating money, you're in a different category as somebody who's doing it for civil rights and social justice. And again, that's what's unfortunate in this community. We got too many of these people who got criminal offenses in their background. And again, I don't have a problem with you having a problem. You redeem yourself and you pay your time. But then you turn around and you do it again and again, socially and ethically, then we need to call you out.
Well, and I just think that that's one of the things that need to happen. I know the power is within the people around here. And two, I do believe that there are more people that want to say something. And I think that as more becomes more uh, um, um, something that I believe that one more becomes more accessible for people,
Knowledgeable.
and they become more knowledgeable about the conditions that they're going. I think we're going to start seeing um, people speak out a lot more
Speak out and
because
speak loud and
um,
speak clear.
because you know, if you hurting out here and you don't scream, you can develop some type of mental issues around here. And I think that they pretty much got this impoverished community kind of set up for some of that. And
Well, it's
um,
obvious. It's obvious after all these years of all these poverty people running around. Again, I'm gonna close out by saying there's an African proverb that says, "If a baby does not cry in its mother carrying skin, meaning the sack that carry the baby, that baby will starve to death." So
mhm.
if you're in pain or you're hurting and they tell you, to be quiet or don't talk about it, then you get the kind of foolishness that we got in this apartheid city. And it is pure apartheid when you can go in certain parts of town and you see certain groups who can't move in some other parts of town because they've been historically restricted either through income or through social norms. And as they say, there are things that are going on in Omaha that people don't necessarily want to talk about, but we've got to deal with. So on that note, Dennis, I really appreciate you being here today. We're going to post this and let people react to it and comment on it. And then hopefully we can get more people to come and speak truth to power and throw out some heavy lights. And we may have to call this a program called Pearls of Light, or throwing out some heavy light, or Wisdom of Pearls, or something of that
Oh yeah,
nature.
we can give them a whole bunch of reality sandwiches here,
There
my
you go.
brother.
And we need that in this dejected, oppressed, wretched earth community. So thank you for being here today. And we hope that you've enjoyed this program. And we're looking forward to doing more of these programs with community leaders and people who can speak out and say things loudly and clearly for our